used for overcoming certain types of trauma. I don't think we've ever had a residential program, and we run them every month, where someone has not experienced the trauma of rape. Far too common in our society today. We've had those that have had to overcome the trauma of a murder of a loved one. Some of the people that have come to our program have seen their loved one murdered right in front of them. Suicide of a loved one. This is something that families don't ever really completely get over. Their entire life, the what ifs, what could I have done differently, etc. We've had, of course, we do have many people with severe depression that come through our program, and they will talk about how they have thought of ending their life, and I've asked them, why haven't you done that? You've thought of it, why haven't you? And often they will tell me, it's because I don't want to do that to my loved ones. Is that a good reason? Yeah, it is a good reason not to do that, because you will be traumatizing your loved ones significantly if you were to go through with that. Now, there may be better reasons not to do it as well, and there's a whole host of reasons not, but a lot of times people are not thinking of others when they do this, or at least their loved ones. Being traumatized continually by a family member or partner is also, of course, a serious issue, and one that many experience. And then traumas of even flunking out of school, or other unfortunate events that have occurred. And sometimes we have to keep these events in perspective. I practiced for 26 years in Ardmore, Oklahoma, across the Red River from North Texas. And you might have heard about in North Texas, the city of Dallas, and they have a football team called the Dallas Cowboys. And it seems like every year I had to treat people for the Dallas Cowboys football team not making it to the championship game. And, I would ask them, is your dad the coach? Because they were so traumatized by it. And no, their dad was not the coach. Does your brother play for the team? No, the brother doesn't play for the team, but they talk about these guys as if they are their fathers and their brothers. But we have to keep that in perspective, and that should be a loss. It's a whole lot easier to overcome. By the way, there have been studies done in America on the most watched television program every year in America. Do you know what that is? It's the Super Bowl. And you actually don't ever want your team to go to the Super Bowl. The reason why is studies show that the team that loses the Super Bowl, the death rates go up in that city significantly within the first 24 hours. And so, and of course, it's about a 50-50 chance if your team makes it, it's going to happen that way. And this past year, the death rates actually went up in both the winners and the losers. There were some reasons why the winners also had significant issues. And so this is, I call it in many ways the manipulation of society, because we have had these football players actually come through our program. Many of them have significant depression. And one of the reasons why they have depression is, one of the causes is traumatic brain injury. And TBIs can increase the risk of depression, and it also can increase the risk of them not doing as well in playing football, particularly if you're a quarterback, because there's only one player on a National Football League team that requires an intact frontal lobe to be successful. The frontal lobe is your analytical area, your decision-making area, and the only player that needs a frontal lobe is the quarterback. And they can be very athletic, but if they're not making good decisions, they're not going to be continue to be hired. And so some of them have gone through, and they will mention that when they're losing a game, an important game, they're not allowed to smile on the sidelines. They have to act like it's the worst thing ever, because if a camera catches them smiling, the fans are going to say, that's why they lost. This guy isn't taking it seriously enough. And after they win, they actually have to act like it's the best thing that has ever happened to them. And you know, the night before, their wife might have kicked them out of the house, hit them over the heads with golf clubs. They don't even want to be at that game, but they have to because it's a contract. But they still have to act like it's the best thing that happened ever. And that's why all these fans get so wrapped up in it. But the professionals recognize that, you know, you're going to win some and you're going to lose some. You just play your best, but that's just the way it's going to be. But the fans don't quite get it. So, loss of a great loving spouse. This is also a significant, serious, and very hard to get over loss. Widows and widowers were less likely to regain the same level of happiness they had before the loss, especially if their marriages were what? Satisfying. And most people who lost a spouse but did not remarry took how many years to recover emotionally? 8 years. So, reality versus distortions. It's okay to actually state things that are reality after a significant loss. I'm losing an important part of my life. Is that true or is that false? It's actually true if you've had a significant loss. And it's okay to say that. And it's okay to believe this. How about this? My world has ended. No, that is not true. Your world is still going. But when you say that, you're believing it, and you're setting yourself up for even a greater problem as a result. How about this? I can't live without her. The person who is saying that is actually living as they're saying the words. But they believe in their mind that they can't, and of course, this makes it even worse. How about this? I will miss the companionship and love that we shared. Yeah, and that's tender, it's realistic, it will add depth and meaning to your life to state that. But how about this? I will never again be happy because he died. It's unfair. That triggers thoughts of self-pity and hopelessness, and those thoughts are based on distortions and will end up defeating you. And so it's also important to understand the stages of grief. There's 3 primary stages of grief. Some have put in some other common stages as well, but this is pretty well present in everyone. Stage 1 is the stage of shock and disbelief, particularly if the loss is sudden, unexpected. The event seems unreal. Feelings of numbness occur. You deny that the loss has even occurred. This can't be occurring. Crying and screaming can be part of it, and anger as well. When we treated those that were affected by the loss of September 11 in New York City, these individuals would talk about, as they were watching those towers go down, it was like they were just watching a scary movie. It wasn't, in their mind, it wasn't really happening. This was the stage 1 of shock and disbelief. Stage 2 is developing awareness. This duration is longer. It can last from 3 to 12 months. At this time, you're preoccupied with the loss, meaning you're thinking about it a lot. Anxiety can develop, restlessness and difficulty sleeping, also very common. Possible characteristics of stage 2, loss of appetite, digestive problems, fatigue, anger, guilt, sometimes identification with the lost loved one, and particularly a year out, a depressive response on the anniversary of the loss. and a clear awareness of the loss. And of course, you're going to recognize consequences of the loss as well. Mood swings tend to be common as well during stage 2, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. The good news about stage 2, although long in duration, you should gradually feel better. Does it say day by day? No. Does it say week by week? No. And that's because of those mood swings. And so you want to evaluate yourself month by month after a loss. And if you're not doing better month by month, it's a sign that you need some significant help, or maybe you need our program. Stage 3 is the stage of resolution. This starts from 3 to 12 months after the loss, but at this point, if you're doing things healthfully, you're going to incorporate new habits, and positive lifestyle changes will actually result as well. You can gradually take charge of your life and resolve the loss through activity, readjustment, and education. So this was an interesting study of 40 men whose immune systems were already compromised. They were studied from 4 to 9 years after they experienced a tragic loss. Grief over the loss of a loved one is often followed by introspection and a reaffirmation of life's worth and meaning. Do you think that's a good thing or not a good thing when you've gone through a loss? It actually is a good thing to have that introspection and to reaffirm life's worth and meaning. 65% of the men engaged in a thoughtful consideration of the meaning of their loved one's death. This is a process the authors call cognitive processing. Once again, that's a good thing to do after you've had a significant loss or trauma. But this type of reflection can lead individuals to different conclusions. For group 1, their loved one's death only emphasized the negative aspects of life. How do you think they did? They did not do good. Group 2, they simply accepted the death and moved on. How do you think they did? Actually, the study showed they did no better than group 1. It's not just accepting it and moving on. Group 3, the loss of a loved one, led them to a newfound respect for life and a commitment to significantly improve their personal life. How do you think this group did? Compared with other subjects, men who discovered this new meaning in life showed significant improvement in immune function. Now, all of them had a disease before this, but even though they were diseased, their immune system improved as a result of the type of cognitive processing they had. This group also showed a significant advantage in long-term survival compared with the other two groups. And this research demonstrated that this newfound sense of purpose can boost the body's immune system as it bolsters the spirit. So in overcoming grief, recognize your life has not ended, put the loss in perspective, and ask, what have I learned? There are always things to learn through trauma and loss. And then follow through with the 5 tasks for healthy grieving. And you can continue to ask yourself those questions during those 5 tasks. So as I mentioned, healthy grieving requires a process called tasks. Tasks imply there is work to do, but this is empowering to the mourner who feels so helpless. Often after loss or trauma, we think that we have no ability to really do anything, that we just have to play the role of the victim. And so let's get to the tasks that can get us out of all the complications of victimhood. So task 1, accept the reality of the loss. Communicate about the loss. That also helps with accepting the reality. Now, a few years ago, there was a woman who had gone through our community program. I know you guys are going to be starting a community program here in a couple of weeks, and hopefully many of you will take advantage of that, just one night a week on Tuesday nights. But this woman had had depression. She was about 40, and she had had depression for over 20 years. been on antidepressants for that long. And she went through the community program, and she completely recovered. She was able to be taken off her antidepressants. She was feeling great. She even went on television and told her testimony and what made a difference and all of that, and she was a big encouragement to others. But about a year after she had completely recovered from depression and gotten off her medicine, her only biological son, age 19, was found dead in bed. And she was the one who found him. So he's not showing up for work. The work is asking where he's at. And they finally get in touch with her. And so she's the only one who has a key to his apartment. So she goes into the apartment, and there he is. He's gone and in bed. So she calls the paramedics, thinking maybe this was just a recent death and maybe they can revive him. And the paramedics came and started to do CPR. And then finally the head paramedic said, "This body's cold. It's been here for a while. We're going to have to stop this and recognize there's no way we're bringing this young man back." So she ends up in the emergency room. She is just totally beside herself emotionally, and she doesn't seem to know which end is up. I'm doing, as a GI doctor, I'm doing some gastroenterology scopes that afternoon, and when your hands are tied up, some of you know in the medical profession, they get put on a speaker and everyone is sworn to the confidentiality as this woman is being talked about by the emergency room doctor. And he says, "I've got your patient Teresa here in the emergency room. Her only biological son was found dead in bed today, and she does not know which end is up. She's saying that you're going to save him, that you're an intensive care unit doctor and you're going to bring him back." And then she's saying other things that don't make any sense at all. "I would like to load her up with IV lorazepam and admit her to the hospital under your service." What do you think I said? I said, "No, we're not going to do this." He raises his voice a little bit and says, "Well, what do you want me to do with her? I can't keep her down here like this." And I said, "Just have her stay there, and I will have someone come over and talk to her." So I called the person who had put on her community program, who knew her well, and she actually worked in our office, and our office was right across the street from the emergency room. So within a couple of minutes, she's in there talking to Teresa. Now, what was she saying? She was asking Teresa more about her son Cody. "What did you like about Cody?" And she would talk about all the things that she liked about Cody. And then she would say, "How do you want Cody to be remembered at his memorial service or funeral?" And Teresa would say strange things like, "Oh, I know Dr. Nedley's going to bring him back. He's a good ICU doctor." "No, he's not in the hospital. He's not in ICU." "Well, they're going to take him to Oklahoma City. They'll save him up there." "Well, they are going to take him to Oklahoma City because they don't know why he died and they don't have a forensic lab in this town. And so they are going to take him up there, but that's just to find out why he died. Tell me, how do you want Cody to be remembered at his funeral?" And then she would start talking about how she wanted Cody to be remembered. And the conversation itself only took about 20 minutes, but I'm not even through with the scope that I had started, and I get a quick call from the emergency room doctor, and he says, "I don't know who that was that you sent over here, but she's oriented now. She knows everything. She's fine, and I'd like to just go ahead and send her home." And I said, "Yeah, you can send her home, but make sure she sees me in my office within at least 2 or 3 days." So communicating about the loss can accept the reality of the loss. And then don't avoid mourning rituals. It was talking about the funeral. Those types of things can help you to really be successful in task one, and that is accepting the reality of the loss. Many people don't want to accept this. They suppress their frontal lobes with alcohol, with lorazepam, with all sorts of things. This is going to complicate their recovery from that loss significantly. And that's why I did not allow that emergency room doctor to load that girl up with IV lorazepam and just delay the inevitable. Task two is to work through the pain. Don't avoid the pain, be honest about how you feel, and even write about the loss. We had helped people through the Oklahoma City bombing episode before we helped out with 9/11. That may have been one of the reasons why we were invited in to New York. Another reason was the head of health there knew me very well and knew about our program, and also knew that book, Depression: The Way Out, you might have seen that book. That book underwent its last, the first printing of that book, the last book, got off of an East Coast press not too far away from New York City, just hours before the first plane went in there. And so all of those books turned out to be ready. Just of course, there was no advance warning. We didn't know about any of this, but the fact that all those books were there, the friend who was the head of the health of New York City invited us in to put on that program. And we had those participants also write about the loss. Now let me explain a little bit about Teresa. I mentioned that she was supposed to see me in 2 to 3 days. She did come back, and she saw me at day number 2 afterwards, and her mouth was going a mile a minute. She was talking about how she couldn't remember how everything was in the room. The detectives were going to come and talk to her because they still, were trying to figure out why this young man died. And she says, I don't remember how this was in the room. The paramedics just, started throwing everything around. And then she was just ruminating and telling me all of these different things very quickly, and then going through them over several times with me. And I said, Teresa, you need to slow down and just write about it like a journalist would. Write the facts. Write what you know is true, not what you think might be, but the things that you absolutely know are true. Go ahead and write it down as a journalist. Also be honest about how you feel, and although this is painful, just go ahead and journal it. And I told her after she's through, then just put it away. And when the detectives come, say, this is what I know is true, have them read it, and it's also set aside for you to be able to refer to later on if need be. What studies show is if you do that, you're far less likely to experience post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder is when there's triggers and then you relive it all again. But if you have it journaled and written down, your brain doesn't feel a need to continue to store all of this there because it's stored over there on paper and through words. And so it's one of the ways of preventing PTSD after a serious trauma. During stage 2, self-care is important. So I asked her, are you getting adequate sleep? She had not been. She had not been going to bed on time. She had not been utilizing her light that had helped her get out of it. It was important that she stay on her balanced diet that had helped her out. And it was also important, even though she was going through this loss, to continue to exercise. Self-care is very important. A lot of people neglect this after a significant loss or trauma, and that's only going to make things worse. It's not going to help heal things. Maintaining social ties is also important. Studies have shown poor social support after a trauma or loss to be more closely related to later depression than even undergoing a history of torture. One of the worst things you can experience is being tortured. But studies show after a serious loss, if you isolate, your mental health is going to come out worse than if you were tortured. And a lot of people, they do isolate, and then they'll say, I thought I had friends. It turns out I don't really have any friends because none of them are here for me. Well, your friends are not psychologists or counselors, and they think that you want to grieve alone or whatever. And it's actually up to you. When you've had a loss or trauma, it's up to you to actually reach out to your friends, and you'll find out that most of them are very glad to be there for you and maintain that social tie. It's also very important as well in the healing process to maintain spiritual ties. After a loss or trauma, who ends up getting blamed often the most? You know, in America, I don't know if it's like this in Australia, but after a significant loss or trauma where you might lose your car or you lose your house, the insurance company will call that an act of God. Now, you know, if you have something very good happen to you, that insurance company never calls it an act of God. That's an act of you, you know. But in reality, we'll talk about the spiritual, maintaining spiritual congruence through all this. But God is very willing to help you through those experiences, and just because they happen doesn't mean that he has really anything to do with them either. So watch out for the nonsense arguments. If only I hadn't had that accident, I would be able to walk today. We've had many people say, what if I just left the house 5 minutes later, you know, or whatever, all of the what ifs, and then I'd be able to walk. Well, if you left 5 minutes later, maybe something else would have happened and you might have actually died, or who knows. None of us can predict the future in regards to the what ifs. But I've also seen individuals who have lost arms and legs in an accident, and they had had a previous vision of becoming a pilot, and they actually invented devices for themselves where they still ended up achieving their vision. They became a pilot without arms and legs. And I can tell you, that's an individual that's not dwelling on any nonsense arguments. They're not going into, if only this hadn't happened, I would be able to have become a pilot, etc. They have gone through task 3 as well, which we'll talk about. And of course, every loss or trauma has the opportunity for you to develop more patience. Patience is something that can help you emotionally, can help you in relationships, and using or allowing these losses or traumas to help you develop patience is an important thing. It's also important when you've had a loss or trauma or something happened to you that you categorized your problem into one of 3 types. The first type of category I talk about in regards to a problem is something that makes it more or most difficult for you to achieve your goals. If that's happened to you, that is a practical problem. But along with that practical problem, very often occurs an emotional problem. And that is your emotional reaction to your practical problem. A third type of problem is one that a lot of people get bent out of shape with, but they should put it in perspective. Third type of problem I call an imagined problem, and that is a problem that doesn't really inhibit you from achieving your goals, but you're just upset about the idea of the situation. So you're upset about the idea, and yeah, there might be good reasons to be upset about it, but it's not really adversely affecting you at all in regards to achieving your goals. So why spend so much emotional energy on that? But what if it is a practical problem, and of course you're having that emotional reaction to your practical problem? It's very important, once you have accepted the reality, once you've done self-care, to relocate the emotional problem. What does that mean? You can say it this way: I will have this really bad problem whether I'm miserable about it or not, so I might as well give up the misery. When you do this, that attitude will help you to feel better and more calm, and it will put you in a better position to do something more intelligent about the problem. That means, your frontal lobe can work well when you're calm. It doesn't work well when you're emotionally angry or upset. And so when you are calm, you're going to tend to make better decisions in regards to the practical problem that has come your way, and thus that practical problem wouldn't necessarily have to have all of those complications for a long term. It doesn't mean that the loss is forgotten. Reminiscing helps, but once you do that, you can then adjust to the environment with the loss. You can build on current or new relationships. You can develop new routines. You can find new interests and continue old ones that are healthy. You can identify the roles the lost person or thing played in your life and find out how these functions can best be met now. And then once you have done that, you are now ready to grow from the loss. Don't settle for just surviving when loss or trauma occurs. Honor the lost person or thing by growing from the pain. Reflect on what you have learned or gained through the loss, and let life become more meaningful, not less meaningful. And then ask yourself the question again, have you grown from the loss? And if not, what are some ways that you can grow from the loss? Now, grief has gone too far if you start developing feelings of worthlessness afterwards. That is always irrational. If you have any ability to be of use to yourself or others, you're clearly not worthless. But yet people will have feelings of worthlessness, and that is a sign that they are not going through the loss or trauma healthfully. If they've had suicidal ideation, that is a sign that they haven't gone through it healthfully. Or if it's grossly impaired functioning, they're not able to really function at all, even a month after the loss, that could be a sign. Or prolonged bereavement. This is the one who's still talking about their job loss 8 years later. And maybe they're so smarting about it, they haven't even tried to find another job. We've seen that before as well. There's a poem that's written by Jane Eggleston that has been helpful to many. Sometimes life seems hard to bear, full of sorrow, trouble, and woe. It's then I have to remember that it's in the where that I grow? The valleys I grow. If I always stayed on the mountaintop and never experienced pain, I would never appreciate God's love and would be living in vain. I have so much to learn and my growth is very slow. Sometimes I need the mountaintops, but it's in the valley I grow. I do not always understand why things happen as they do, but I'm very sure of one thing, my Lord will see me through. My little valleys are nothing when I picture Christ on the cross. He went through the valley of death. His victory was Satan's loss. Forgive me, Lord, for complaining when I'm feeling so very low. Just give me a gentle reminder that it's in the valleys I grow. Continue to strengthen me, Lord, and use my life each day to share your love with others and help them find their way. Thank you for valleys, Lord, for this one thing I know, the mountaintops are glorious, but it's in the valley I grow. 1 year after September 11, 2001 occurred, I went through a very serious loss. I had helped the residents of New York City to go through their losses, but I went through the sudden loss of my own father. He was a healthy man. He was someone who was just loved by everybody who knew him. He was very objective. He was an engineer. And whenever I had things that I needed to have clarity on, I would just call up my dad, and he'd be able to give me clarity, point out some objective things. And then he always said, well, that might help you with your perspective, but what you do with that information is up to you. And so I was able to make far better decisions with that perspective as a young man growing up. And I was very close to my father, as were my other 4 siblings. And so when he lost his life due to Legionnaire's disease, Legionnaire's is an infection that can affect and cause death in young people. And so even though he was healthy, it caused him to go into acute respiratory distress syndrome and then multi-system organ failure. And he ended up losing his life in about 6 days. And since he was intubated on a ventilator, when I came home from Europe hearing about his admission to the hospital, I never did get a chance to say, he never got a chance to say his last words to me, which I know would have been very profound and would have been very helpful. And so it was a serious and heart-wrenching loss. And a month later, remember you're supposed to measure yourself month by month. So I knew a month afterwards I needed to start evaluating myself. And I was going through the things. I was even maintaining spiritual ties. I was going to church that particular weekend. And there was a friend of mine who had also lost his dad around the same time. And I had taken care of his dad on some of his final days in the hospital as a physician with my GI specialty. I was consulted by his family doctor because he had advanced cirrhosis of the liver. But he ended up passing because his liver was so eaten up. And I said, Rodney, you lost your dad around the same time I did. I said, how are you doing? He said, I'm doing pretty well. He said, I do, feel bad for my dad, but me and my family, we're doing fine. I said, I'm not doing fine. And I told him the significant issues I was having with the loss of my father. And he says, well, Neil, you have to understand a little bit about my dad. He said he was an alcoholic. He was not good to my mom at all. He wasn't good to us kids. He said, I feel bad for him, but it's not been really any great loss for us. And I thought, which would I have rather had, a real rough time going through this loss and a loving father, or a father like Rodney where it's not really that big a deal? What would you choose? I think you would choose what I would choose, and that is to have had the loving father that I had. And that's the other side of loss. The other side of loss is actually love. And it's the reason why we have loss. Because love has to be a voluntary act. God, we're told in the scriptures, God is love, and he wanted us to be able to experience love, which means he had to give us freedom of choice. And that freedom of choice sometimes we use in non-loving ways, and bad things can happen as a result of that. Would you rather have a world that had no loss but no opportunity for love? Or would you rather have a world where love is possible, but it comes with complications of losses? I think I would choose a world of love, even though losses can be possible. And when we have it in that perspective, we can get away from blaming God from these things because he did give us the freedom to choose, a frontal lobe to analyze things and make our own decisions, whether to love or not love. But loss, although it was never meant to be originally, it's a complication of freedom, which is necessary for love. We're told there's a creator who has made a plan that we should never experience loss, sadness, or death again. We're told he's not only the creator, he's the recreator. Creator. And if we are faithful, we will actually be able to see with our own eyes that recreation. So I had to evaluate myself, but also started asking the question, how can I grow from this loss? What I had realized is my father, one of the reasons why he was such a great man in so many respects, is that he had a love for the Lord. I remember as a young man going to the youth or early teen classes in church. Sometimes those classes weren't the greatest, and I would sneak out to go to my father's adult Sabbath school class. I always learned more from him in the adult Sabbath school class than often I did in the youth group. And I loved learning from my father. He was also a master teacher. And I realized that one of the reasons why he was such a great and wonderful counselor is because he was close to God. And I realized I'm never going to hear that voice again. It's not like, it was almost like I was calling up God himself, when I had issues. But I realized I don't have that opportunity for those phone calls anymore. And so I need to take this opportunity to get as close to God as my father was. And that was how I was able to grow from that loss. And it's not been disappointing at all in regards to drawing close to God like he is. So take comfort. There's another side of loss. Without love, there would be no loss. And then a little bit about what we've learned. There's many different types of losses. Healthy mourning moves you through the stages of grief without being complicated by major depression. Should not allow cognitive distortions to creep in and adversely influence the reality of your loss. And through this approach, you can have disappointments turn into appointments. But in the meantime, we're told to run with how? Patience. I've noticed I've developed a lot more patience than I had in those days as well. Run with patience the race that is set before us. I went a little bit over. Let's take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back for another meeting on emotional intelligence. We'll go through some examples of some low emotional intelligence people that can become high emotional intelligence people. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.